I always thought there would be a place for me, even if it was just a folding chair in the corner of the room. The box of ribboned trinkets sat half open on the counter, a mix of modest things. Cufflinks, shaped like little hammers, a navy tie with faint gold stitching, a book Greg mentioned in passing 6 months ago, but never followed up on. I'd wrapped them with the brown paper I kept from last year's holidays, the kind that wrinkles at the edges no matter how you press it. I checked my phone once then again. No missed calls. I stood with my hand on the kitchen chair, waiting longer than made sense. Then the screen lit up. Courtney, just a message. Hey, today's just a little thing. Nothing formal. Hope you understand. Greg will call later. I stared at the heart emoji longer than the words. That part felt like a stain on white linen, a too bright thing that called attention to what wasn't said. The kettle clicked off behind me. I didn't pour the tea. I'd already gotten dressed. Light makeup, the pale blue blouse with the slightly uneven collar, and my husband's watch, which never worked but always fit. There wasn't a seat for me, but I hadn't realized it yet. I sat back down and retaped the corner of one package. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe Greg had meant to call and got pulled into some last-minute thing. Work a child's fever traffic. These were reasonable. The watch on my wrist didn't tick, but time moved all the same. I opened my laptop and typed his name into the search bar out of habit, more than intent. The first thing that came up was a tagged photo. I recognized the room, Clover and Stone, that white tablecloth place Courtney liked. A round table. Stemmed glasses. Greg's smile broad and empty in the way people pose for clients, not family. Courtney's hand was on his arm. The caption read, "Blake family shining bright at Greg Holloway's birthday dinner." I clicked to enlarge. Greg in the center, Courtney beside him in that plum dress she'd once said was too formal for our crowd. Her parents, both beaming. Two couples I didn't know. And on the far side of the table next to Greg, an empty chair. Napkin folded untouched. Wine glass full. No place card. I imagined the server asking if they were waiting on one more. I imagined Courtney's voice clipped and smiling. "No, we're good." I scrolled through the other pictures. No one looked out of place. I didn't call. I didn't text. I folded the lid of the gift box shut and slid it under the small table where I kept unpaid bills. There was no ceremony in it, no bitterness. Just the act of putting something where it wouldn't be in the way. The blue blouse felt too tight around the shoulders. I unbuttoned the top and sat still. My thumb traced the rim of a mug I hadn't used in years. It was from a vacation we took to Oregon when Greg was 12. Raymond had picked it out because of a faded pine tree logo that reminded him of a park near his childhood home. The handle was chipped. I couldn't remember when Greg had last asked how I was sleeping, or if I'd eaten, or whether the apartment had heat last winter. I couldn't remember because he used to ask once. I remembered Courtney's tone at Thanksgiving. "It's just easier if we host this year. Your place is well, you know." Tight. "But you understand." Yes. Tight. I understood. When I tried to bring pumpkin pie homemade, the kind Greg liked when he was small, Courtney had smiled without her eyes and set it beside the store-bought one. "Oh, lovely. We have one already, but options are fun. No one cut mine." Greg never noticed. "That pie dish is still in their pantry, I think." I heard the neighbor's door open, the young man who lives down the hall. He listens to sports radio too loud in the mornings. I wondered if he knew today was my son's birthday. I wondered how many people did. Not that it mattered. I glanced once more at the photo on the screen. Someone had commented "beautiful family," and Courtney had replied with a string of gold star emojis. Family. Raymond used to say that word like a vow. Greg says it like a signature. Courtney says it like a brand. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. The blouse hung looser now, maybe because I was no longer holding my breath. There had been no anger, just the tightening of something internal, like a drawstring, pulled too far, and now it wouldn't release. I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't reach out to correct the record. There is no record. Just that one empty chair. And the sound of nothing, where once there was a voice that used to call me Mom. I didn't get up. I didn't change. I didn't cry. I watched the light on the far wall as it faded from gold to a shadowed gray. There would be no dinner, no cake, no thank you for coming. And I thought not for the first time how much quieter the world becomes when people stop pretending to include you. But I didn't leave. I sat very still. And I let the silence answer for me. I learned early that harmony depends on how quietly you place your hands in your lap. There were years when I believed I was doing it right, not just enough right. I arrived on time. I left early. I offered to help only when asked and disappeared just before I became an extra chair. If a casserole was needed, I brought two. If Courtney admired a set of linen napkins in passing, I made sure a box of them arrived with a thank you card by the weekend. Once I found a butter dish she had bookmarked online and wrapped it in the same tissue paper I used for my church envelopes. She opened it in front of Greg. "Cute," she said, turning the lid upside down. "But I don't really eat bread anymore." Greg laughed and reached for his phone. I tucked the empty box into my coat pocket and said nothing. There was a glass pitcher I used to bring to gatherings, clear, heavy, with a fluted lip. I stopped after the third time it was returned, with someone else's salad dressing still clinging to the rim. I downsized quietly when I moved. Told them, "No need to help. It's not much." I thought I was being considerate. That was the word Greg used when he called to ask if I was sure about living alone. Courtney's voice in the background. "She said she likes it quiet. That's what she wanted, isn't it?" I told them yes. The phrase I used was, "I just want to make things simple for everyone." I remember Courtney's housewarming party. She had printed menus, miniature succulents in gold pots, and a ring light set up for candids. I stood at the kitchen island for most of the afternoon refilling glasses and wiping water rings off marble. When dessert came, she made a speech. "We couldn't have done this without my mom. She makes everything look effortless." Everyone clapped. I placed the extra forks on the buffet and folded the dish towel back over my wrist. Courtney walked past me with a bottle of Prosecco in one hand, and air kissed my cheek. "You know how to stay in the background. That's a skill," she said. No one looked at me when she said it. I think that helped. A month later, Greg called about the tuition. "It's not urgent," he said. "But if you could help cover the spring semester for Ava, we wouldn't forget it." I asked how much. 5 would get us through this round. "But please don't tell Courtney. She's funny about money that comes from people she can't repay." I mailed the check that day. No note. 2 weeks later, I received a thank you card from Ava herself. Lined, paper printed, name, no return address. "Thanks for helping my future." The envelope smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. There was a time I tried to speak, not to accuse, but to clarify. Greg had stopped by the apartment after a deposition downtown. I made sandwiches. He took a call halfway through. When he hung up, I said, I feel like I'm always on the outside of things lately." He blinked once. "Mom, you're being sensitive again." I nodded. I offered him another sandwich. He declined. After he left, I folded the crusts into a paper towel and placed them in the freezer. I used to tell myself Raymond wouldn't have allowed this, but even he would have said, "They're busy. Don't take it personally." I stopped saying things after that. At Easter, I brought plastic eggs filled with dark chocolate. Courtney replaced them with metallic ones she'd ordered online, said hers looked more on theme. I sat beside the guest bathroom for most of the day. Once I wore a silk scarf Greg had given me for my birthday 10 years before. Courtney glanced at it and tilted her head. "That color's tough on older skin," she said, sipping from a glass with her initials etched in gold. I left it in their coat closet on my way out. I never asked if they found it. Greg's birthday came, one year I don't remember which, and I offered to take him to dinner, just the two of us, somewhere casual. He texted back, "Courtney planned something already. She's good at that." I stayed in, made pasta, watched the news. The next morning, there was a photo online. Greg in a dark suit, Courtney in white cake, taller than the centerpiece. The caption read, "Built from love, not inheritance." I didn't understand it, but I didn't ask. I ironed my blouse that week and folded it back into the drawer with the sachet Raymond had once brought home from a conference. I've noticed silence gathers weight over time. Not loud weight. Not the kind that crushes or shouts. Just small, exacting pressure in the chest, like the touch of a finger that never lifts. I don't remember the last time Greg hugged me without glancing behind him first. When I signed the lease on my apartment, I bought a small, round table with 2 chairs. One faced the window, the other faced the wall. I thought maybe he'd visit. I thought maybe he'd sit across from me and ask something besides how I'd been sleeping. The wall chair's still clean. The other one has coffee stains I don't scrub anymore. I've read that people shrink with age. I think it happens elsewhere. First expectations, then vocabulary, then appetite. I used to explain myself. Now I wrap up my answers in 3 words or less. It keeps things efficient. No one likes an echo. Courtney once left a voice message about a brunch they were planning. She ended it with, "No need to bring anything. Just don't overdo the stories." You know how Greg gets. I saved it for a while. I don't know why. There are picture frames I haven't filled, a ceramic tray where I keep my rings, a receipt folded into the shape of a crane sitting next to the mailbox key. All things that belong to one person. I used to believe that trying was enough. Now I keep my effort quiet. The kind no one applauds, the kind that leaves no fingerprints. I still place my hands in my lap, but lately I don't fold them. Some silences are not empty. They just arrive folded inside something else. The Christmas card came in a red envelope with silver edging. I recognized Courtney's handwriting immediately, ornate, almost rehearsed. Inside the message was pre-printed in cursive gold. "Wishing you warmth and wonder this season." At the bottom in black pen, a line drawn too straight. Greg and Courtney, plus the kids. No dear mom. No love. No note. Not even an initial. I kept it on the mantel for a few weeks, beside a paper snowflake Ava had made years ago when glitter still impressed her. At some point, the card slid down behind a photo frame, and I didn't reach to pull it back up. It stayed there until the pine needles had dried and the heater gave out again. Later, I found it bent in half tucked between magazines. I almost didn't remember who it was from. Courtney had her second child in the spring. I knitted a pair of baby blankets with scalloped edges, one soft gray, one cream, and mailed them with a note in my smallest, neatest handwriting. I didn't hear anything for days. Then while browsing online to order wool, I saw an image that made me pause. Same scalloped edges, same yarn, listed under handmade baby set, like new. Seller location, Maplewood. The profile photo was cropped too tightly to be sure, but I recognized the light fixture reflected in the background. It hung above their kitchen island. The listing disappeared 2 hours after I clicked it. When Greg got promoted last year, I left a comment under the firm's announcement post, "Proud of you. Always have been." He responded beneath a different comment from his mentor. Couldn't have done it without the amazing people who shaped me. He never clicked like on mine. I don't think he saw it. Or if he did, he scrolled past it like an ad you've seen too many times to notice. On my 60th birthday, I booked a table at Leona's Cafe, the one with the yellow awning and the piano player who never finishes a full song. I'd told Greg about it weeks in advance. He'd said they'd try to swing by depending on the kids' schedules. They arrived 40 minutes late. Courtney ordered sparkling water and asked if the lighting could be adjusted. Greg apologized for traffic, though I'd checked the weather that morning and it hadn't rained. They left before dessert. No card, no gift. Later, I found a sticky note on my front door tucked under the wreath. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. Love, G." I folded it into my wallet next to a bus receipt and left it there until the ink smudged into the paper. There was a Tuesday last year when I gave a workshop at the community center. Basic budgeting for senior women. We printed 20 flyers. 17 people showed up. I'd made handouts with small graphs and wrote quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt on the margins. I emailed Greg about it after attaching a photo someone had taken of me standing beside the chalkboard. Went well. Thinking of doing a series. Just wanted to share. He texted back the next day. "Sounds okay. Honestly, though, not sure how many people really care about that kind of thing. Maybe focus on something simpler next time. Like coupon tips." I didn't reply. I just placed the printouts in a manila folder labeled Trial 1 and slid it into the drawer with expired tax forms. That was the only session I led. There's a cupboard above my sink with 2 shelves. On the lower one, I keep what I use. Chipped plates, plain mugs, 1 saucer that belonged to my mother. The top shelf holds what's never used, a monogrammed cutting board from their wedding, a bottle of wine Greg once brought that I never opened, 3 spice jars, labeled in someone else's handwriting. I dust it twice a year out of habit. Sometimes I remember things without context. Courtney folding a napkin with one hand while texting with the other. Greg setting his phone face down at dinner. My name absent from the RSVP list on a digital invite that still arrived in my inbox, as if the omission had been intentional. Other times, it's not what I remember, but what I forget. Did I ever teach Greg how to sew a button? I know I meant to. Did Courtney ever ask how Raymond died? I don't recall. Once I found one of my old letters in their guest room drawer, creased with the envelope still sealed, but slid open, clean across the top. The note inside was brief. 3 lines, nothing controversial. I'd signed it Mom. A corner of it had been used to blot something. The ink had run. Greg once asked what I wanted for Mother's Day. "I'm fine with anything," I said. Courtney answered for me. "Maybe don't get her something. She doesn't really use things." That year, they brought a digital photo frame. It stayed blank until I returned it to the store for store credit I never used. I still wear my wedding ring on my right hand. Not for memory, for symmetry. The band has a scratch from when I dropped it between 2 paving stones. Raymond never noticed. That seemed fair at the time. Most of what has faded did not vanish suddenly. It wore down, like handwriting left in the rain legible until it wasn't. I never expected confetti. I didn't ask for fireworks, but a name, even one scribbled on a card, carries weight, or the lack of it. I kept the envelope from that Christmas card, not the card, just the envelope. There was nothing inside it that felt like mine. There are words that land softly, but split something on impact. Greg had called with a kind voice, the kind that used to come from a hallway payphone in college, muffled but warm. He mentioned a quiet dinner, just the 3 of us, no occasion, no distractions. I pressed my thumb to the receiver like it might make his voice stay longer. When I arrived, Courtney was already seated. Her posture was composed, deliberate, one leg crossed high over the other. A leather clutch rested next to her water glass, unopened but conspicuous. Greg stood to greet me. His jacket had the fold line still visible on the back, as if it had just been taken out of plastic. They ordered quickly. She pronounced the names of the wines with confidence, almost performative. I skimmed the menu and pointed to a starter roasted beets with a balsamic glaze. Courtney gave a small hum. How modest. Don't worry about price, really. We're treating you. Then she looked over at Greg and let out a little breath of a laugh. It's cute, isn't it? Like watching someone try to eat fancy food with camping forks. Greg didn't look at me. His knife rested neatly along the rim of his plate. Mine tilted slightly, catching the candlelight. I folded my napkin twice before placing it on my lap. The waiter poured the wine into slender glasses. The stem felt foreign in my hand, like something borrowed. Courtney leaned forward, her elbow brushing against her clutch. Greg and I were talking the other night. We're concerned, you know. You're alone most of the time, and that little place you're in, it's not exactly cheerful. She paused to sip her wine, her lipstick leaving a faint coral print on the rim. I mean, no visitors, no real meals, just canned stuff, I'd imagine. That's not how anyone should live. Or die. The word hung there like a mist. Die. Greg traced the edge of his bread plate with one finger. The salt shaker wobbled slightly beside him. I kept my hand around my glass, not drinking, just holding. Courtney's tone softened, as though she were unveiling something generous. We actually looked into a few options. Not depressing ones, modern, well-staffed, clean. Places where you wouldn't have to struggle. You'd have neighbors. Community. Someone to call if the heater broke. I waited a moment before answering. Not because I didn't have words, but because I needed to remember which ones still belonged to me. I appreciate the thought, I said, adjusting the strap of my purse beside me, but I manage fine. Courtney tilted her head. That's what you always say. But managing isn't living. Greg shifted in his seat. Mama, he said, barely above a whisper, we just want what's best. I took a slow breath. The bread in the basket between us was untouched. Courtney smoothed the napkin in her lap and smiled with something tight around the eyes. Come on. That apartment's like a shoebox. No sunlight. No space. You deserve better. You deserve dignity. I counted backward in my head, 432. And we could sell the jewelry, she added, looking toward my ring. That's not being used for anything, is it? The silver band on my finger felt colder than the glass. I looked across the table at my son. His face didn't move. Courtney exhaled again lightly, as if trying to soothe a misunderstanding. Honestly, we're not being cruel. It's just, you're not really living anymore, are you? You're just there. Alone. Watching reruns and heating soup. She took another sip. The waiter returned, placing plates down gently. My beets glistened beneath a sprig of parsley. They smelled sweet. Greg cut into his steak with surgical precision. The knife made no sound. I didn't touch my fork. You think independence means something, but it's just stubbornness now. Courtney continued, reaching for the salt. You're clinging to pride while your world shrinks. I placed my napkin on the table, folded once. No raised voices, no cracks in the glass. Just her words, methodical and unblinking. Greg finally looked at me. Not for reassurance, just to see if I was nodding. I didn't. Not then. Not at all. There was no room in my mouth for food, no space between the lines they'd drawn around my life, like yellow tape at a construction site, dangerous, unstable, soon to be demolished. I thought of the little ceramic dish on my counter where I placed coins, paper clips, the keys I no longer needed. How small things gathered there quietly, without asking for permission. I thought of the wool scarf I wore even in spring, not because it was cold, but because I liked the way it smelled after being folded in my drawer all winter. I thought of the stool I used to reach the top shelf, and how steady it had remained despite its age, No one had asked what I wanted, just what could be removed. "Let's not drag this out," Courtney murmured, adjusting her earring. "We're only saying what someone had to say." Greg didn't meet my eyes again. The candle between us flickered once, catching a corner of the tablecloth in its light, then dimmed. I didn't speak for the rest of the meal. I simply set my fork down edge-aligned with the napkin, and I stayed quiet long enough for the wine to go warm. There are choices that feel less like decisions and more like breathing after holding it too long. I hadn't touched that wallet in years. Not the one in my purse, but the old one Raymond used to carry the leather softened at the edges curled slightly like parchment left in the sun. I kept it in the drawer under my socks, not to hide it, but to keep it away from frequent light. Greg followed me out to the parking lot after the dinner. He walked 2 steps behind, then caught up. The restaurant was still lit behind us, warm with voices that didn't include mine. "Courtney's tone wasn't great, I get that," he murmured. "But she cares. It's just concern, Mom." I didn't look at him. He went on. "We just want you somewhere better. It's not an attack." I opened the car door. My fingers trembled slightly, so I slowed them. "You sat there," I said. "You heard her." He didn't deny it. He looked away. That night, I opened Raymond's wallet. Inside was a black and white photo of Greg with a paintbrush in one hand, wearing a garbage bag as a makeshift art smock. His cheeks were flushed, his teeth gapped. I'd taken that photo during a community fair. He'd painted me a yellow cat that looked more like a potato, but I'd framed it for years. I placed the photo face up on the table. Then I unfolded the envelope taped beneath the lining of the wallet. Inside were the documents Raymond and I had signed years ago. The mutual account, the cabin deed. We never used a draft of a trust we once meant to finish. And a note in his handwriting, "Whatever happens, don't forget what we built." The next morning, I put on my navy cardigan, the one with a missing button I never bothered to sew, and called Helen. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's revise everything." She didn't ask why. When I arrived at her office, she slid the document toward me, already highlighted and marked for signatures. Her assistant brought water and quietly shut the door. Helen's pen tapped once. "Are you sure?" I nodded. She adjusted her glasses and read the line aloud. "The undersigned revokes all prior wills and testaments and declares this to be her full and final expression of intent." I signed. "Do you want to leave anything for Greg?" she asked, voice level. I shook my head. "No, not in that way." The room was quiet, except for the scratch of her pen. Afterward, she handed me a manila envelope. "I found a listing you might like. I remember you once talked about mountains." It was a house, small, wooden, wrapped in pine trees, near a lake, far enough from the city. The kind of place Raymond and I once imagined we'd retire to before plans got pushed into files and then forgotten. I ran my thumb over the printed photo. The corners were faintly creased from someone else's hands. At home, I emptied my file drawer, stacked every envelope in Rose's tax records, Greg's old school forms, Raymond's utility bills, and all the things no one had asked about in years. I folded the letter Greg once wrote from college, thanking me for sending cookies. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't reread it. I placed everything into a box marked archive. Not for memory, just for order. Courtney texted the next day. "We didn't mean to offend you. Please don't overreact." That word sat on the screen like a fly on glass. I typed nothing back. The day after that, Greg called. I let it ring. No voicemail. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, a pre-signed admission form for an assisted living facility. Glossy brochure, a form letter addressed. "Dear Sandra," and a post-it in Courtney's handwriting. One tour could change everything. I placed it under the leg of the wobbling table in the entryway. Some exits don't need doors, just a direction. I canceled Thanksgiving plans through a written note, no explanations. I let my phone go to silent. At the grocery store, I saw the same woman I used to run into during school pickups. She didn't recognize me. I didn't reintroduce myself. Helen called again. The Mountain House was still available. I told her I'd think about it. Then I walked into the bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. Not the large one for vacations, but the medium-sized one with a broken zipper tab. I sat beside it, not packing, just sitting. I looked at my hands dry at the knuckles. The ring I used to wear my wedding band was now kept in a small bowl near the sink. I'd stopped wearing it after the dinner. The bowl had 2 buttons, a safety pin, and a marble. I didn't know where the marble came from. Maybe Greg's childhood. I held the ring up to the light. It no longer fit quite right. The band had grown tight over time, or my hand had changed. Perhaps both. I didn't put it on. Later that evening, I placed the Mountain House flyer inside Raymond's old wallet where the photo of Greg had been. I closed the wallet, not with force, just a firm press until the snap clicked shut. Then I turned off the lights, left the room, and chose not to speak for the rest of the night. Some silences are not empty. They are a kind of space one must grow into. I didn't move houses. I moved inward, away from the sound of Greg's name spoken with pride by strangers, away from anticipating the hum of a phone lighting up with plans that included me, away from the habit of folding myself small to be more acceptable. The apartment hadn't changed, but I had opened the windows, all of them. For weeks, I'd only cracked 1 or 2 out of habit. But that morning, I unlatched them all and let the air in, even the noise of the street and the neighbor's dog and the wind that scattered receipts across the table. I didn't chase the receipts. They could stay under the leg of the chair if they wanted. I replaced the sheets with the blue ones I had put away for guests. I was the guest now, the guest of my own space. I moved the armchair closer to where the sunlight traveled mid-morning, a little island of quiet warmth. The rug underneath was worn where I used to vacuum most, back when I believed tidiness earned points. Each morning I boiled water in the dented kettle I'd almost thrown out last spring. I used the same mug white with a chip at the lip and a print of tiny pine cones. Raymond bought it at a gas station gift shop in Colorado during one of the last drives we took together. I sat by the window and opened a blank notebook. Not a journal, just a lined notebook from the dollar store. On the first page, I wrote, Day 1, no longer waiting for Greg's calls. The pen shook a little as I finished the sentence, not from age, but from some tremor in the part of me that had been silent too long. I underlined it once. Then I closed the book without rereading it. That afternoon, I walked to the park 2 blocks away. The same park I'd passed for 3 years without stopping. A child rode by on a scooter wearing a cape made of a pillowcase. A man slept on a bench with one shoe off. The wind caught the corner of my scarf and pulled it toward the street. I let it. I sat by a fountain not to reflect, but simply to sit. There were no mentions of Greg Holloway, attorney at law. No one asked whose mother I was. I watched a young woman fix her lipstick using a phone screen. I watched a toddler drop a cracker, pick it up, eat it anyway. I stayed until the air cooled, and my spine reminded me it was time to stand. When I got home, I wrote Day 2. Poured tea without hearing old echoes. I didn't need to explain to myself what that meant. I had stopped making explanations. By the end of the week, I found the envelope Courtney had mailed 3 months ago with birthday photos. I opened it. The card was pre-printed. No note. One of the photos showed Greg beside a table laughing. A chocolate cake with sparklers. My name wasn't mentioned in the printed caption taped to the back. I slid the photo into a drawer beside the paperclips. I donated 2 coats I hadn't worn in years. I left the dry cleaning tags on. No one called to ask why. On day 5, I wrote, "Walked without thinking of whether I was being watched. I didn't need company. I needed my own attention." I found a library card in an old wallet, bent and faded. I hadn't stepped inside that library since before Raymond passed. I returned. No one recognized me. I liked that. I walked to the non-fiction section by muscle memory. My fingers landed on the year of magical thinking. I hadn't thought about Joan Didion in years. I took the book down, ran my hand along its spine. A paperback with creases. I checked it out without hesitation. At home, I opened it to a page I didn't remember. Grief turns out to be a place none of us know until we reach it. I closed the book and left it beside the kettle. The next morning, I folded 3 dish towels, even though no one else would see the drawer. I lined them up like offerings. On day 7, I wrote, "Breathing is easier when I'm not listening for footsteps." I hung a small wind chime on the window latch. Just 3 pieces of dull copper. They barely made a sound unless the wind leaned in very close. That was enough. Courtney sent another email. "Hope you're doing well. Greg says you've been distant." There was no question mark. I didn't reply. Instead, I cleared space in the hall closet. I laid out a puzzle I hadn't finished from last winter. I lit a candle I'd been saving for no real reason. One evening, I heard a couple arguing downstairs. Their voices rose like steam, then faded just as fast. I didn't turn down the radio to listen better. I turned it off. By day 10, I didn't write anything in the notebook. I just drew a line across the page and left it blank below. The kettle hissed at the same time each morning. I stopped pouring more than I needed. I dusted the bookshelf. I moved a photo of me and Raymond from the hallway to the kitchen where the light touched it around 4 p.m. I didn't speak to the photo. I let it exist quietly beside the bread box. I hadn't removed Greg's number from my phone. I hadn't called it either. I ironed a blouse I hadn't worn in years, hung it on the door, and watched the fabric fall smoothly under its own weight. That evening, I read another page from Didion. "We are not idealized wild things. We are imperfect mortal beings." I thought, that sounds about right. Then I blew out the candle, placed the book gently on its back, and said nothing else. I never thought quiet could carry a shape, but in this house it did. It wrapped around the corners of the stairwell, sat in the rocking chair on the porch, and hummed low in the old pipes. It wasn't empty. It was mine. I hadn't told anyone when I bought the house. There had been no announcement, no group photo with keys in hand. Just me, a check folded crisp inside my wallet, and a closing date marked in pencil on the back of a utility bill. The realtor, a woman named Tamara with silver-rimmed glasses and a softness in her voice, handed me the keys, like one might hand off a secret. "You're the only buyer I've had this year who didn't ask where the grandkids would sleep." I slept the first night on a borrowed mattress wrapped in a blanket I had kept since before Greg was born. The stitching had loosened in one corner. I didn't fix it. The days after were spent slowly. I planted lavender under the kitchen window. I scrubbed the tiles with lemon oil and vinegar until the grout remembered it had once been white. I replaced every curtain with something sheer, something that could move when the wind came in without asking. On the 3rd Sunday, I rearranged the books by color, then by author, then by mood. It wasn't for anyone. That felt important. The SUV came just after noon, the tires crunching too confidently over the gravel. I recognized the sound before I saw the car. I was kneeling near the front path trimming the lavender back into shape when the engine cut off. I didn't stand. I heard the doors open. Greg stepped out first. His shoes were too clean for the dust. Courtney followed behind, carrying something wrapped in plastic. A color palette swatch. Or perhaps fabric samples. I couldn't tell. "I told you this spot would be perfect for a nursery," she said. Her voice pierced the quiet, like a phone ringing in church. Greg didn't look at me. His eyes drifted over the porch, the pine trees, the fence I hadn't finished staining. Courtney's heels clicked against the stone as she walked toward the door, already speaking. "We'll need to repaint, obviously. This cream is depressing, and maybe knock down that wall for more light." She stopped and looked at me as if I were a tenant who had overstayed a lease. "No offense, but I really didn't expect you to go for something this ambitious," she said. "Glad to see you're not living like a hermit anymore." I stood. Not quickly. I didn't speak. Greg finally looked in my direction. His mouth opened, then closed again. I saw the listing online. Courtney continued brushing a speck of dirt from her sleeve. "At first I thought it had to be a mistake. But then Greg confirmed it, your name on the deed and all." She gestured toward the upstairs window. The loft would be perfect for Alice. I was thinking maybe soft oak tones, something gender neutral, just in case. I blinked. That was how I learned she was pregnant. "I'm not sure what you were thinking staying here by yourself," she added. "But of course we can work something out. It just makes sense, family living together. Saves money, keeps everyone close." Greg shifted his weight hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. "I already told her we could wait until after the baby comes," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. "But she thought it'd be easier to move now." Courtney smiled like it was a favor. "Besides, she said you've got the space. More than you need, really." That sunroom. Honestly, it's wasted on one person. I turned and walked to the porch. My coffee cup from that morning was still there, a thin brown ring settling into the ceramic. I picked it up, ran a finger along the edge. The silence between us gathered weight. Greg stepped forward. "Mom." I didn't know she'd just show up like this. I told her, "You told her I bought a house." I said the first words I'd spoken. I didn't think she'd... "No," I said again. He looked confused. No to what he asked. I looked at him. Really looked. The line at the edge of his jaw, the way his collar sat too tight beneath his suit coat. He hadn't dressed for a visit. He'd dressed for a negotiation. "There is no nursery," I said. Courtney frowned. "You're being difficult. We're not here to fight." "You're not here for me," I said. She laughed short and low. "You always make things personal. This is about practicality. You're getting older, you live alone. It's not sustainable. We're trying to be generous." I turned and opened the screen door, then closed it behind me. Through the glass, I watched them stand there waiting. Courtney kept talking, her hands animated. Greg stared at the gravel. After a few minutes, she walked back to the SUV, shaking her head. He followed. I didn't watch them leave. Inside, I folded a blanket over the back of the couch. I straightened a frame on the wall. I turned the page in my notebook. Day 74. They came. Not for me, for the house. The cup still sat beside me. I traced the coffee stain again, then flipped the cup over. The underside read, "Bloom where you're planted." Some things don't need to be spoken. Some things just need to be left out of the driveway. I never realized how quiet a door could sound until I didn't wait for footsteps behind it. The latch clicked into place with no need for apology, no voice saying, "Let me just..." Nothing followed. That kind of silence feels rounder somehow. Whole. I brewed the tea slowly. Not for them, but for the gesture of it. Earl Grey, 1 bag for 3 cups, the way my mother used to stretch things. I folded the napkins, not matching, just clean. Set out a plate of ginger snaps I knew no one would touch. Courtney walked in first, as if she'd done it many times before. Her heels clipped across the tile sharp and rehearsed. She glanced toward the staircase. "This space could really open up with some skylights," she said, "and maybe change those cabinets. Oak is very dated now." Greg followed, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. "You've done a lot with it already, Mom. But you don't have to worry about maintenance stuff. We'll take care of all that. Just keep your room. It's still the master after all." I poured tea slowly, careful not to spill. The pot made a soft glug like it was sighing into the cups. I didn't correct him. I didn't smile. "No one's taking care of this house but me." Courtney blinked. Her voice dipped a note lower, but not quieter. "We're just trying to help. Obviously, you bought this place thinking we'd live together eventually, and that's fine. Alice will love the view." I handed her the tea without looking at her hands. No one was invited. There was a pause. Not long, but deep. Courtney tilted her head. "I just thought I looked up." "That's the problem." Greg cleared his throat. His wedding band clinked lightly on the cup. "I thought you might want family close. It's a big place. Doesn't feel like something you'd need just for you." I placed the sugar jar between us. The spoon inside rattled a little when I set it down. "Raymond and I found this valley in 1981. The road didn't exist then, just a deer path and a dream." Courtney chuckled, short and tight. "Sounds like a movie. I couldn't afford to build here when he was alive. Life always got in the way. College, emergencies, a new roof, a child." Greg shifted in his seat. "So I built it now, for me." Courtney leaned forward, her voice wrapping itself in silk. "But living alone this far out, it's not practical. I didn't choose practical. I chose peace." Greg's voice dropped. "So, you don't want us here?" I stirred my tea without drinking. The old silver spoon was from my wedding set, one of 3 things I'd kept. It bore a small dent near the handle. Raymond once used it to pry open a stuck window when we were first married. I didn't say that I replied. I said I didn't ask for you. Courtney folded her arms. "I mean, it's a little much for one person. 5 bedrooms. That's not independence, that's isolation. Isolation is when people speak around you in your own home. When your name is left off the card. When your hands make the dinner, but someone else makes the toast." Greg rubbed his temple. "We didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to see me." He looked at the floor. "So, what now?" I picked up a lavender bloom from the vase beside me, one I'd clipped that morning. The stem was slightly bent, but it stood upright. I twirled it slowly between my fingers. "You asked me once if I was lonely in that apartment. I was. But not because I was alone, because I wasn't allowed to be a person." Neither of them responded. Courtney glanced toward the hallway again, but this time didn't speak about paint colors. I stood and walked to the window that faced the trees. The pine needles were catching the light. I pointed. "That trail out there leads to the old orchard. Raymond wanted to plant peach trees. We never did. I think I might." Courtney gave a polite nod. "If that makes you happy, I'm not aiming for happy, just whole." Greg finally looked at me. "Do you really want to start over at this age?" I touched the ring on my right hand. It was my father's resized. He used to say nothing good ever came from rushing someone. I thought of him when I rewired the light above the sink, when I stacked firewood for the winter, when I signed the deed without asking for advice. I already have. The room was very quiet, not in a heavy way, just clean, like when something has been swept after sitting dusty for years. They stayed a few minutes longer, made small comments about traffic, then stood to leave. Greg touched my shoulder before he walked out. It didn't linger. When the door clicked shut, I didn't lock it. But I didn't follow either. I refilled my tea. The water had cooled, but I didn't mind. I sat by the window again and watched the trees shift. The wind didn't need permission to move through them. It just moved, and I let it. I never liked the sound of paper tearing. Even soft, controlled rips made something in me tense. Maybe that's why I folded the letter 3 times, so precisely, before slipping it into the envelope. It sat on the counter beside the new set of keys, brass ones heavier than the old. There was a kind of quiet defiance in how they clinked when I set them down. I had chosen the locksmith myself, watched him remove the old lock, the one Greg had used since college breaks. He didn't ask why I was changing it, only commented on how the new model was sturdier, more secure. I nodded. A box sat open on the table, cream-colored, scuffed at the corners. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were photographs, neatly stacked. No frames, just glossy rectangles of former days. Greg on a tricycle, his father's hand steadying the seat. A 4th of July picnic where the pie had collapsed and everyone laughed. A Christmas morning when Courtney was still new to the family and wore that red scarf I gave her, the one she later said looked quaint in a Hallmark sort of way. I didn't cry. I placed them all in a manila envelope, sealed it with clear tape, and wrote in ballpoint across the front, "Memory, not obligation." Helen called that afternoon. "Just confirming, do you want to include the foundation clause as we discussed?" The part about visitation restrictions, yes. There's no reversal if they contest it. That's the point. I had always handled my finances quietly. Even Raymond never asked how much I saved, just trusted I knew what I was doing. I never made large gestures, never bragged. But everything was there. CDs, bonds, dividend stock, the last of the retirement accounts I hadn't touched. I transferred them all to Golden Hearth Foundation, effective immediately upon my passing. Greg and Courtney were no longer listed, not as heirs, not as emergency contacts, not as anything. The only letter I wrote was to Greg. 3 paragraphs. No blame, no history. I once hoped to leave this world held by people who knew my real laugh, the smell of my baking, the sound of my footsteps. But I've come to understand I prefer to live with air and light, even if it means alone. If one day you come here not to take, not to change, not to ask, but to see what I saw, then do so once and leave it as it is. There is nothing here for you to own, but you are welcome to witness it once without touching. I didn't know if he would ever come, or read it, or understand the weight behind its gentleness. But the letter wasn't for impact. It was to end the story in my own handwriting. Courtney had once said during brunch between bites of quiche, "Greg and I are already planning our legacy. You know, real estate branding, establishing long-term visibility." Then she laughed and added, "Not everyone ends up remembered unless they make themselves hard to ignore." Greg had smiled at that. I stirred my tea and nodded the way you nod at the edge of a canyon you don't intend to cross. I didn't need visibility. I wanted rest and room. When I walked through the house that evening, I noticed small things I hadn't before. The shift in color across the hardwood from morning light to dusk. The way the wind moved differently depending on which window I opened. I picked up the tin box I'd always kept my will in. Tucked inside were receipts, a few letters from Raymond, and the old notarized version of a life I had once shaped around others. I slid it into the fireplace. It didn't burn dramatically, just curled, browned, and fell inward. Later, I made chamomile tea without checking my phone. That, too, felt like a kind of deletion. There were no voicemails waiting. I had turned off message previews, removed Greg from my favorites list. The silence was not harsh. It didn't echo. It just sat there like a room recently cleaned. One of the last papers I signed was a visitor clause, something Helen helped draft. Should any previously listed beneficiary or relative file protest or inquiry about the estate, Posthumously legal recourse will be nullified and access to the premises, even as visitors, shall be permanently revoked. She looked at me, a long pause between us. Sandra, this is a very final sort of thing. I know, it's meant to be. I didn't say what I truly meant, that sometimes when a door remains slightly open, people never learn how to knock. I replaced the framed photo on the mantel with one I took myself a view from the upstairs window, showing only trees and sky. No people, no celebrations, just what I had loved all along. I cleaned out the guest room. No more folded towels waiting, no basket of hotel toiletries. I removed the twin beds, replaced them with a single chair and a reading lamp. That room wasn't for guests anymore, it was for breathing. The final thing I did was polish the brass number on the front door. Just the number. No name beneath it anymore. The morning after all was settled, I wrote one line in my notebook. Day 108. No spare key exists. I closed the cover and didn't look for my phone. I never imagined peace could feel so silent. Not empty, just unburdened. The tea kettle makes its familiar sigh. I pour the water over loose leaves, watch them swirl, then settle. This routine never needed witnesses to feel real. But today, as I glance out the window, there's someone beyond the gate. He isn't moving. One hand rests on the fence, as if waiting for it to open on its own. He isn't wearing a tie, no coat, no briefcase. His hair's longer than I remember. He never used to let it grow past his collar. That used to mean something. I let the water steep too long. By the time I unlock the porch door, the tea has gone dark and slightly bitter. Still, I bring it with me. I sit in the rocking chair. He doesn't ask to come in. Just lowers himself onto the top step, hands between his knees like a child waiting to be called in from recess. There's a pause that could have lasted a decade or a breath. You used to stir sugar into your coffee 3 times, never more, never less. I don't respond. I sip my tea. I remember thinking that was your way of controlling something, like if you stirred it 3 times, the rest of the day might behave. A pine cone drops somewhere beyond the garden. We both look, but neither turns our head. He shifts his weight. There's no speech prepared, no apology rehearsed. I used to think you were difficult. Always so. Quiet when you didn't agree. Like silence was a trick. I glanced down at my hand, the one with the ring, too worn to catch light anymore. I see now, he continues. It wasn't a trick. It was all you had left. He doesn't cry. He doesn't reach. His voice is steady and smaller. I lost everything. I know that doesn't undo things, but it left space to notice what I'd never looked at. He turns his palms upward on his lap. You never once yelled, not even when we treated you like background noise. The rocking chair creaks once. I don't respond. My tea has cooled. He reaches into his jacket, something thin and wrinkled, not the kind that goes with courtrooms. He pulls out a book, hardcover, spine faded. He places it gently on the porch between us. Doesn't slide it. Doesn't explain. I recognize it instantly. Residential Framing and Foundations, 1979 edition. The one Raymond used to prop up the leg of our old bedside table. I open the cover. A line in graphite near the binding. Someday I'll build the house that looks out over the valley for Sandra. Dated in Raymond's hand. June 1985. I close it again. Not because I'm done reading, but because I've read it before. Greg speaks again, quieter this time. If you ever need anything, even if it's just someone to pull weeds or carry heavy boxes, I don't need to talk. I just want to be allowed to help. I don't look at him. I look at the horizon where the early sun is climbing slow and pale behind the pine ridge. 1 hour. Once a week, I say. He nods before I finish. I don't say more. No money, I add. No talk about paperwork. No questions about the house. Again, he nods. Just mother and son, I say. If that title still fits. His shoulders shift, not in triumph, not in relief. Just release. The kind you only allow when you realize no one is watching for it. We sit like that for a while. Eventually, he stands. Not abruptly, not with ceremony. He just places his hand on the porch rail, steadying himself. Same time next Saturday, I don't answer. As he leaves, he doesn't turn back. That too feels right. Not dramatic, just unfinished, like old stitching never pulled tight. A few mornings later, I hear the gate click again. He's there, no fanfare, no knocking. He carries nothing but that same book, leaves it on the porch table, and steps back. I open the front cover again after he's gone. My eyes rest on the sentence. Raymond's handwriting has softened from age, the graphite absorbed deeper into the fibers of the paper. Later that afternoon, I clean the inside edge of the porch windows. I don't rush. The rag smells faintly of lemon and old varnish. Greg doesn't speak when he returns the following week. He brings no tools, no coffee, no apologies. He stands by the flower bed for a few minutes, then sits on the stone ledge. I'm already outside, tea in hand. I pour a second cup, set it beside him. Neither of us touch it. There's a sparrow rustling in the cedar nearby. A breeze shifts a small pile of leaves we both ignore. I don't speak. He doesn't either. In this silence, I notice things more: the warmth of the ceramic mug, the way shadows move across the porch boards, the rhythm of breathing that no longer needs to fill a space with noise. There are no visitors, no documents, no claims, only this stillness and the fact that we're both willing to sit in it. He places the empty book back on the bench before he leaves. This time he has written nothing new inside. I decide not to either. Some relationships return with apologies. Ours returns with the absence of demands. And I find myself thinking not about whether I've forgiven him or whether he deserves to be here. I think only this. Perhaps the greatest peace is not in proving anything, but in no longer needing to.